So here are the notes for using corresponding parts of congruent triangles, which is also known as CPCTC. By the end of the period, you guys will be able to apply the concept of CPCTC to prove that corresponding parts are congruent, given that your triangles are congruent. So the basic idea is that you are given some information, and then you want to prove the triangle is congruent by using any of these five theorems. HL we haven't learned yet. That will come on at the end of this chapter, but you can use side, 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 angle, side, angle, or angle, angle, side. Once you prove that the triangles are congruent, you can show that the corresponding parts are congruent. So like you can say that, angle A is congruent to angle D if they aren't already proved that those are congruent. And that would be by CPCTC. So these are your reasonings behind proving that the triangles are congruent. These are the reasonings behind showing that the corresponding parts are congruent. So if two triangles are congruent, then all their pairs of corresponding angles and sides are congruent. So if you have, triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF, then angle A would be congruent to angle D, angle B would be congruent to angle E, angle C would be congruent to angle F, and so forth. Which is corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So as long as those two triangles are congruent, all of those parts will also be congruent. And that, again, is abbreviated as CPCTC. We will use this in our proofs. You don't have to write this whole thing out. That would take way too long. Use CPCTC. So looking at this, are these figures congruent? Judging by what we learned from Monday or Tuesday, okay, you have an angle that's congruent to an angle, then a side that's congruent to a side, then another angle that's congruent to another angle. So to me, this is angle, side, angle. In that theorem, if you have angle, side angles, that means that the two triangles are congruent. So triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF by angle, side, angle. Once we know that the two triangles are congruent, which we just proved by using angle, side, angle, we can say that the other pieces that are not marked are congruent. So angle B is congruent to angle E, line segment AB is congruent to line segment DE, and line segment BC is congruent to line segment EF. So CPCTC, if stuff is not marked in your picture, okay, once you know that the triangles are congruent, you can state that those corresponding parts are congruent. So the ones that are not marked, we can say that they are congruent to each other by CPCTC. And again, that stands for corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. The most important part about CPCTC is that you have to prove triangles congruent using one of our theorems before you can use CPCTC. So CPCTC will not be one of your first or second reasons. You have to prove that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF before you use CPCTC. Okay, so tell why the two triangles are congruent. Okay, give the congruent statement, then list all other corresponding parts of the triangle. So looking at this triangle here, or these triangles here, I have two sides that are congruent, and I have two angles that are congruent. That, to me, I can use one of my theorems that I have, which would be side, angle, side. And to get this piece here congruent, we know that TA is the same thing as TA. That line is congruent to itself by the reflexive property. Okay, so this is like an informal proof here. Your first step would be to say that line is reflexive or is congruent to itself. So then, because we have side, angle, side, we can say that those two triangles are congruent to each other by side, angle, side. Make sure that, your corresponding angles add up with the corresponding angles in the other triangle. Now, because we proved that those two triangles are congruent, we can go ahead and say all of the pieces that we did not mark are congruent. So we can say angle E is congruent to angle M by CPCTC. We can say that angle TAM is congruent to angle TAE by CPCTC. And we can also say line segment EA is congruent to line segment MA by CPCTC. So you guys go ahead and try the next one. Figure out which theorem that you're going to use first. I knew that I was going to use side angle side here because of the givens that were on my diagram. The next one, you guys figure out what you want to use first. Pause it and give yourself a couple minutes to complete this. I'm going to go ahead and get started on this. So I know that I have two sides that are congruent right now. So the easiest one to use here would be side, side, side. So I know also that JN is congruent to itself because of the reflexive property. If that is congruent to itself, I can use the side, side, side theorem to prove that those two triangles are congruent. Once I prove those two triangles congruent, then I can list out that all of my other angles are congruent to its corresponding part. So angle UJN is congruent to angle EJN by CPCTC. Angle U is congruent to angle E by CPCTC. And angle UNJ is congruent to angle ENJ by CPCTC. So now we're going to put this into like proofs. Okay, so this was pretty informal. The next one you're going to, or these next four problems, you're given your specific info and you need to get to the proof statement. So you want to think about what info are you given, what is missing or what is implied in the picture, what triangles are you going to prove to be congruent, and how can you use CPCTC. So a proof writing checklist here, the main thing that you need to remember is what is your end goal. So your end goal is your proof statement. You want to label your pictures based on your given. So if they give you, an angle is congruent to another angle, label that on your picture. What can be implied by your picture? Like if there's parallel lines, what could we say about, alternate interior or alternate exterior angles? What could we say about vertical angles? What could we say about, 90-degree angles? That kind of stuff. You might need to pull out your Chapter 2 reference sheet or your Chapter 3 reference sheet to help you remember some of these theorems. Make sure that you have 3 congruent statements before you say that the triangles are congruent. Okay, so given AB is congruent to DC, so I'm going to go ahead and mark that. AB is congruent to DC, AD is congruent to BC. So right away, I know that I can use side, side, side here to prove that the triangles are congruent. And I can do that by saying DB is congruent to DB by the reflexive property. So then I'm going to make my little tick marks there. And because all 3 sides are congruent, I can go ahead and say that triangle ABD is congruent to triangle CDB by side, side, side. And once I prove that those triangles are both congruent, I can do my proof statement. Angle A is congruent to angle C. They're in corresponding parts by CPCTC. Again, you can only use CPCTC after you prove that the triangles are congruent. So that is why I have my step 2 as the triangles are congruent, and then I can use CPCTC to do my proof statement. So you guys go ahead and try the next one. It's exactly the same setup like this. It's just a different theorem that you use. This is a formal proof. So notice how in our proofs that we did not write down the givens here. You do not have to do that. It is implied on your picture. When you draw in those tick marks, that shows that they are congruent to each other. That is your given. Okay, so basically we are doing 3, or we are writing 3 out of the 5 steps. So go ahead and try this one. This here, make sure you change it on your notes. Your guys' note says line segment DA. That is wrong. It should be AC, line segment AC. So I will give you, well, pause the video so that you can complete that. But angle KBC, I'm going to go ahead and write this stuff in. Angle KBC is congruent to ACB. And angle K is congruent to angle A. So I have 2 angles in a row here. I know that the only one that I can use when I have 2 angles in a row is angle side. So, and I know that BC is congruent to BC because of the reflexive property. Now I'll draw my tick mark in there. And then I can say, because I have angle side, I can say that triangle BKC is congruent to triangle CAB by angle side. Again, you need to use one of the 4 things that we learned on Monday or Tuesday. Now, because I said that the 2 triangles are congruent, I can go ahead and use CPCTC to show that these corresponding parts are congruent to each other. Now again, if you want to take a look at your at the formal proof, okay, we have our 2 givens. We mark that on our picture. We use the reflexive property. Again, we don't really do these on the proofs that we're creating, but you can show that by marking it on your picture. So on to the next one. AB is parallel to DC. And then angle B is congruent to angle D. So sometimes they're going to mark it on the picture for you, sometimes they're not. Our goal is to, obviously, we're going to have to prove the triangle is congruent because we need to get some line segments congruent to another line segment in the other triangle. Okay, so right off the bat, I know that AC is obviously congruent to AC by the reflexive property. Now, if this is not wasn't your first step, it's perfectly fine. We all think of this in a different way. I think in the class before, I said a different step first. It's fine as long as you get to your proof statement and you use congruent triangles before CPCTC, you're good. So this is congruent to each other. Now, we have parallel lines here, right? So this line's parallel to that one. This line here is my transversal. Think back to chapter 2, chapter 3. Alternate interior angles are congruent. So I have alternate interior angles, right? These 2 would be, okay, these 2 would be alternate interior, and these 2 would be alternate interior. It does not matter which pair you use. I do not care. But I am going to use this one, angle BAC. So this one here is congruent to this angle here. So angle BAC is congruent to angle DCA by the theorem. And again, you might need to get out your chapter 3 bank of reasons. Parallel lines means alternate interior angles are congruent. You have to have a reasoning behind these things, guys. So now we have, okay, we have this angle, and a side. So angle, side. So we can say that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle CDA by angle, side. And because those 2 triangles are congruent, I can do my proof statement BC, which starts with the single red angle and goes to the no angle. Single red angle goes to the no angle. make sure that they're corresponding, is congruent to line segment DA by CPCTC. And again, you can do the formal proof. So here it is. We don't write the givens, obviously. We just mark them on our picture if needed. So then the last one, MP bisects LMN. Okay, think back to chapter 1. The word bisects means it cuts that thing into two equal parts, which means that these two angles here are congruent. Okay? And then LM is congruent to NM. So right away, the easiest thing here is going to be side angle side. So I know that PM is congruent to PM by the reflexive property. I can draw my tick mark in. Then I can say that triangle PMN is congruent to triangle PML by side angle side. So again, we have to prove those triangles are congruent before we do anything. Because we prove that they're congruent, so LP is this way, NP is this way, they're both, this corresponding angles, they both end in P, so LP is congruent to NP by CPCTC. Okay, now the formal proof, okay? So we have our two givens. Notice how they put in step 3. So they say that NMP is congruent to LMP because of the definition of angle bisects. You do not have to write that on your informal proof. If you want to, that's fine. But whenever you see that word bisects, if you know that that cuts my angle into two congruent parts, all you have to do is mark that on your picture, and that is perfectly fine for me. That means that you understand that rule. And then here is the rest of that proof. So, if you guys have any questions, if you're watching this later on or whatnot, let me know, email me, please sign up for SRT. Your homework is a Canvas quiz, but obviously it's just homework. So you have 4 questions on there, it's worth 10 points. Use your notes to help you. It's the exact same setup that we did on your notes. You're just trying to prove that the triangles are congruent and then using CPCTC. If you guys have anything that you're missing, make sure to get that turned in as soon as possible. The test for Chapter 4 is next Thursday and Friday, December 10th and 11th. I want you guys to be prepared. Let me know if you have any questions. Have a good day.